Types of corrosion. By the time we finish this presentation, you should understand or be able to describe metal corrosion. You'll be able to understand the significance and how we limit metal corrosion, and you should be able to list or identify two different types of corrosion. Aircraft structures and components are obviously going to use metal. The older aircraft certainly did. And as we get into an aging fleet or an older aircraft, we find out that corrosion is really, it's a pretty expensive matter, costing the airlines and costing the airline industry millions and millions of dollars every year. If we could figure out how to stop the corrosion, it would certainly be a good thing. But currently all we can do is limit corrosion. We start looking at some ways that we can protect or reduce corrosion. If you take an aluminum alloy, say a 2024 alloy, we take and we clad that with pure aluminum. We put 10% of the total thickness of that aluminum alloy is pure aluminum. And what that pure aluminum does is that corrodes, but then it causes a barrier and keeps oxygen from getting to the alloy, and that reduces corrosion. Another way that we can reduce corrosion is with a chemical agent, an allodyne, which we can do in the field, or an allodizing, which is done actually at the factory. And what those do is those actually, again, they accelerate a corrosion on the aluminum, but then they create a barrier. And what that barrier does is keeps the oxygen from getting to the metal, the aluminum alloy itself. And again, without the oxygen, we don't have any of the corrosion. Then we can have lubricants. You can put like a grease or an oil or a spray, a PCP, a corrosion preventative, a CPC, corrosion preventative compound. You can spray that on your material, and again, that keeps the oxygen and the moisture from getting to your iron alloy, and that, again, that reduces corrosion. And lastly, we can paint it. Painting, you're going to find, not only makes the airplane look very presentable, but it also reduces or eliminates corrosion. Chemical or electrical chemical corrosion attacks or degrades metal. It can damage the external metal, causing it to get rough. It weakens it. It causes it to degrade the strength, but it can also start working from the inside out. The main source of chemical corrosion is going to be water or salt and oxygen. When they mix together, they become an electrolyte, and they allow the transfer of electrons. And as those electrons transfer from one material to another, that actually causes corrosion. And we'll talk about that as we get further into the presentation. Unchecked, if we do nothing about the corrosion, your airplane or your structure is going to get weaker and weaker over time, to the point that it's either going to cost a lot of money to get fixed, or it'll be beyond repair, and then we'll end up having to send it to the aircraft graveyard. If we look here at this presentation here, you can see aluminum and magnesium. We've got a little bit of pitting corrosion. It's got a gray-white powder dust on it. You can almost take and rub that off with your fingers. You're going to start to notice the pitting. The pitting actually is going to go down at 90 degrees from the surface, and you're going to see it's going to get deeper. When you go to remove that pitting, you've actually got to get all the pitting out. You're going to have to be careful that you don't remove too much material, because then all of a sudden it becomes structurally too weak, and even though you've got the corrosion removed, now it's unserviceable because you've got too much material removed. Another thing, look at copper. You've seen the copper buildings, copper roofs on buildings, how the roofs start to turn green over time. That is a corrosion as well. It's a pitting, it's an etching, it's a green film, but over time that becomes a protective film as well. And then last, steel. Steel is just, it creates a red oxide. It'll cause flaking. And steel is constantly, no matter what you do to it, steel is always trying to get back to its original element, its original compound, and it does that through corrosion. Two types of corrosion: direct chemical attack and electrochemical attack. The direct chemical attack are going to be things like battery acid or exhaust fumes and things of that nature. And then the electrochemical attack could be salt water, could be any type of moisture that actually allows electrons to flow from an anodic type material to a cathodic type material, flowing from a magnesium to something that is more cathodic, and we'll look at that chart. As the metal gives up the electrons, it actually corrodes in the process. very similar to the battery terminal posts on your battery. If you notice, you don't really have any battery acid there, but you have anodic cathodic where the electrons are actually going from maybe the terminal to the post on the battery, causing that electron flow every time we start our car or we charge our battery. There's the electron flow, and those electrons are going back and forth, and that's when you get that white powdery material that actually causes a higher resistance, leads to other problems. But you can kind of see on the battery posts on your car that electrochemical type corrosion. Direct exposure to a corrosive agent. Again, common causes. We talked about battery fumes. So how do we keep battery fumes from causing that corrosion? One of the ways is we have sump jars. So the battery fumes come out of the battery, they go through the sump jar with a baking soda. If it's a lead acid battery, it's going to go through a baking soda type material. That's going to neutralize those battery acids to reduce that corrosion. Another type would be residual flux. When we're welding aluminum, we put a flux on there to actually break up the surface oxides, and if you don't clean that flux off after you're done with the welding process, that stays there and that continues to cause more corrosion. And then the caustic cleaning solutions. If you get carried away and maybe you go down to and buy or purchase or use the wrong type of cleaning agent, that in itself can cause a type of corrosion, or worse than that, it can cause a hydrogen embrittlement where the metal actually gets surface hard and actually causes cracks that way. So we need to be very cautious on the chemicals that we're going to use to clean our airplane with. Some of the solutions we just talked about. Sealed lead acid batteries. That's certainly the way to go. The gel cells are very common now. But if you don't have a gel cell, how else can you do it? We talked about the sump jars. A lot of aircraft come with sump jars in them that will actually take and allow those fumes while you're charging your battery. It produces battery fumes. Those fumes go through the sump jar and they get neutralized before they exit the aircraft. We talked about removing the fluxes after you get done welding aluminum. You want to make sure all those fluxes are removed, all that flux is off of there. Again, any residual flux is going to lead to corrosion. And lastly, just monitor your cleaning agents. Make sure your agents are on the approved cleaning list. There are advisory circulars out there that have approved lists. Your manufacturer is going to tell you what's approved. When in doubt, ask. Electrochemical attacks, similar to electroplating, which we talked about, or anodizing, which is a chemical process that we put on the aluminum. Most aircraft corrosion is going to take a very similar form to what you see in this picture, where you have those, we've got our alloys where you have aluminum and then we've alloyed copper into it, or we've alloyed magnesium into it. We've alloyed something into that aluminum to make it still lightweight but stronger. And if during the heat process we don't do the heat processing properly, those elements actually clump up, and it can actually cause, as you can see in the picture, an anodic and a cathodic cell inside that aluminum alloy. And as they exchange electrons back and forth, we're going to get some intergranular corrosion down inside the material. And here's that anodic cathodic chart that we talked about. And we'll start on the top here. Magnesium is an extremely active material. In other words, that magnesium is going to give up electrons really fast and is going to corrode extremely quick. And we continue to go down the line. You got aluminum, you've got 2024 T4 aluminum, steel and iron. The farther we go down the list, the less active it is. Okay, and then we come over here, we've got brass and copper. Just think of the list coming down and then continues on down, all the way down to the bottom. You should see one of the least active materials is gold or platinum. You notice the Egyptians when they made their pyramids, what did they make them out of? Where did they make all their statues? Out of gold, and they're still in good shape. Why? Because it's a very cathodic material. It's not going to give up its electrons. It doesn't corrode very fast, whereas magnesium corrodes very, very quickly. When we build our airplane, if you're going to build it and you're going to have something that's out of magnesium and it's going to come in contact with something that's farther down the list, say maybe a bronze or a copper, or maybe even a stainless steel or even an aluminum, you're going to want to put a barrier between it, whether it's a barrier paper or whether it's a paint. But somehow you want to keep those metals from touching one another. If they touch one another, we can get that electrochemical process and we can allow the transfer of electrons. But if you can protect it with paint or grease or something just to keep them protected, you're gonna limit that corrosion that's going between them. Again, you want to try to keep metals as close together as you can. So if you had maybe an aluminum with a 2024 aluminum, they're very close on that nobility chart. They're not going to corrode as fast. But the farther they are on that chart, the faster they're going to corrode. The more that anodic metal is going to give up electrons and corrode. Electrochemical attack. Alloys are going to respond to corrosive mediums. Metals that have different electrical potential. Back to that chart we just talked about, that anodic cathodic chart. The farther they are apart on the chart, the faster they're going to corrode. The more active the metal, remember that magnesium way in the top, that's an anodic metal. It's going to be giving up the electrodes. The farther down they are in that list, the more cathodic, the gold and the platinum, they're not going to be giving up their electrons quite as fast, so they're going to last a lot longer. They're not going to corrode. We don't have a corrosion issue so much with it. Remember, go back to that copper roof we talked about that turns green. You don't see gold turning green because why? Well, because it's more cathodic than copper is. What causes corrosion? What conditions are going to be conducive to corrosion? Metals with different electrical potentials. We just talked about an anodic cathodic chart. How do we control the corrosion? Well, the first thing we want to do is keep our airplane clean. We want to refinish the surfaces that get damaged. Remember, we talked about paint. Paint not only makes the airplane look good, but paint seals it off so that we don't end up with further corrosion. The cleaning of the airplane, keep it clean, keep the dirt off of there. The dirt is going to hold moisture up against the aluminum alloy or the aluminum, and that's going to cause corrosion. Remember, we talked previous lessons about how dirt actually adds the weight to weight and balance. Well, now we're talking about dirt that actually gets there and it holds the moisture up against the paint. Or go into the galley of an airplane where you have food crumbs and stuff like that that are attracting moisture and holding it against the aluminum. All that stuff, anything that is going to hold moisture against the aluminum structure or against the metal structure in general, is going to cause corrosion. So in summary, what we did was we talked about aircraft are composed of metal structures. We talked about that they're susceptible to corrosion. We looked at the fact that there are methods out there to help us reduce that corrosion. Metal corrosion is basically the deterioration of the alloys, trying to get them back to their original chemical content. Direct chemical attack is from exposure of bare metal to caustic liquids, battery acids, things of that nature. And then we get into the electrochemical. The dry chemical is just the fumes, whereas the electrochemical occurs when a metal comes in contact with a corrosive agent. We talked about improper cleaning solutions. We talked about different items like that that are actually going to lead to corrosion. We've discussed some ways that we can reduce that corrosion. And remember, we're never going to eliminate corrosion. Our goal is just to try to reduce it. Corrosion costs the airlines millions of dollars every year. We're getting into an aging fleet. Airlines are not replacing airplanes as fast as they did, and it's our job to not only to catch the corrosion early, but make sure that we make proper precautions or take proper steps to reduce or eliminate the corrosion as much as possible.